Just chat amongst yourselves, everyone. Do you want to talk about modern monetary theory while we're in the depths of stuff?
No, it's actually not all that modern anymore. It's been around for quite some time. But this is the reality behind the nonsense you get about the government needs to balance its budget.
Mm.
So the media likes to say, well, government runs a deficit, that's bad because households have to balance their budget, therefore the government should as well, and therefore it can only spend what it raises in taxes over the long term, and more taxes are bad, therefore we should provide less services.
But governments don't like this is, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm really not a student of life or economics. Governments, they effectively, if we invest and spend, it's good for the economy, inflation will help.
Yeah, I wasn't quite going all that far, but the right level of inflation is an important one. But the reality of the way non-gold-backed currencies work is that the government can create, assuming you've got an independent central bank and you issue in your own currency. That's number one proviso for why this works. So government in those circumstances can spend as much as it wants. Mm. And it doesn't have to borrow it. It can just create it. And every dollar that it creates that isn't offset by taxes is a transfer of wealth to the private sector. So the wealth that is enjoyed by Australian households comes from the accumulated deficits of governments over the years. There is no other way you can create Australian dollars. Some leakage with global trade, but setting that aside for a moment. So the constraint on government spending is not how much they can borrow, because they don't need to borrow. It's just a book entry at the RBA. The constraint comes with what happens with the money. So if the government is spending stuff, they only spend it on something. They're going to give it to public servants to spend in the shops. They're going to buy submarines. They're
build tunnels, build highways.
So if that will create inflation where they're demanding resources that are in short supply in the economy. So recently, because they're spending all this money on infrastructure, what's been in short supply? Engineers, tradies, concreters, building materials. And so that's inflationary. And the two ways to stop it being inflationary is to raise taxes to effectively recoup some of that money, or raise interest rates, or demand something that's less in demand. So there is no practical limit on what a government in those circumstances can spend. The reason we have a bond market is not because the government needs to borrow money. It's because the banking system and the financial institutions and the public need somewhere to park money safely.
Mm. And that was the problem when the Fanta Fuhrer did his tariff things and things were getting shaky. What happened with the US bond market, because that was the real determining factor for him to come back out and go, oh, just kidding, we're not going as hard?
Yeah, the argument there, tariffs are inflationary. Inflation means bondholders want to require higher returns. Therefore, the percentage of the US federal when spent on interest goes up. They could readily solve the problem by effectively buying back those bonds, by printing more money. So there's this delicate dance between keeping confidence in the market, that what's worse is inflationary expectations and rather than the inflation itself. And when those two get out of kilter. You saw the similar thing after Rachel Reeves' first budget in the UK, where the gilt market just went bananas. But from a practical perspective, there is no real limitation on how much the government can borrow or print, as long as what it's spending on isn't in short supply. And what you would do the other side of it, so if you've got the government creating money by spending more than it's taxing, you then have to use the central bank to drive down that inflation. So those two sort of work.
So so before we bore everyone to tears, the things with this modern monetary theory that you need to understand is when you hear a politician say, if you ran your house a deficit, you wouldn't have a house long, you're really bad, that's political crap.
Well, it's factual crap. It's politically expedient because it's a great way to go, the Treasurer won't let me spend this money, and we have to balance it.
But the real health of a government would probably be what the debt to GDP. Like when you actually look at how much a government is spending, because if the GDP is growing, it's okay to have debt growing.
Well, that's
rising tide, boats.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way you would have looked at it in a Keynesian world, where you say that governments run deficits in bad times and surpluses in good times, but over the cycle they need to balance their budget. That was true where the constraint on printing money was the gold supply. That's not what the world looks like today. It hasn't looked like that since 1971.
Have you heard the conspiracy there's actually no gold at Fort Knox?
Well, there actually isn't. Most of it's in New York.
Oh, well, where the main gold story.
The main score is actually
the conspiracy that America actually doesn't hold the gold that it says it holds. Anyway, that's a conspiracy.
Sorry, but
let's move on to another.
But the point of this is you can't have any money if the government doesn't run a deficit.
Yes.
So get used to it.
Yeah.
How big it is does sort of matter in the long term.
Okay, well, but that's the whole and I get it to a point that we take the inheritance tax thing, right? I don't want to pay an inheritance tax. I've earned all this money, like tax the rich type. This is big. We need Jess Brady here. We need a regular communist here. So the whole thing was, I'll use an example. I probably don't heaps care myself if there was an inheritance tax of estates worth over $10 million. Use that as an example. The reason why, because that money goes back onto the roulette table, which is back into the society that you were able to make that money from. So what's the problem of, like, was it ever yours? Yeah, you're on this planet for 10 minutes and then you're gone. You've end of game player, over 10 million, money goes back into the pot because it's going to get put back out onto the playing table. Yeah.
I mean, this is one that I've changed my mind on over the
And I've oscillated.
I used to find this the most offensive tax I could possibly think of because it's taxing money that's already been taxed. And
so is GST.
and around the world,
is it not?
Yes, it is. But around the world,
state-based stamp duty taxing money has already been taxed.
But around the world, inheritance taxes don't actually raise all that much money.
No, because most people don't have lots of money.
The UK raises about 1.8% of its total tax take from inheritance taxes. Like it's a rounding difference. But one thing I think could make this more simpler and more palatable is to treat the transfer on death as a CGT event. So that
I'll buy it.
So that today when I give shares to my heirs, so I die and Max inherits my ETFs, he inherits my cost base.
Yes.
But the transfer itself doesn't trigger a taxable event.
Yeah.
But when he sells it, he's going to sell it based on my original cost base. So the tax will eventually get paid.
But sooner than later. But you're saying
I'm saying we should trigger that transfer should be a new CGT event, which triggers the obligation to pay the tax at that point.
Yeah.
You'll still have your principal place of residence exemption. You'll still have your pre-CGT events.
Because I think
it doesn't catch the non-CGT events. So
the crazy thing, and this is the crazy psychology part, a lot of the outrage you see about death tax, right, and inheritance tax. Yep. Like, number one, there is always, different parts of the world, a threshold. Over X amount or under X amount will be tax-free as an inheritance. Over that threshold will be an inheritance tax. If that threshold was a magical $5 million, right, or 10 is my example, everyone in the comments, don't tax that. Number one, most of the people in the comments are never going to be at the threshold anyway. But what I think it does, it dampens the ambition, because everyone wants to have lots of money. Everyone wants to be wealthy. And that's why I think a lot of people are so outraged against it, even though they're probably never going to be there, but they might want to be there one day. And when I get there, I don't want you to tax my inheritance.
Yeah. I must admit, I'll be beyond caring when it applies to me. And the same true for most people who die. The only people who are going to bear the brunt of it are the heirs. So if you just bring forward that CGT event other than for a transfer to a spouse or dependent child, it sort of levels the playing field.
And I get it, because the problem is, and I think what Dave Ramsey is like, a problem with giving money at the government, they don't know how to spend it properly. Like and I get that, there's a lot of government waste, but even in Australia, there is enough sovereign wealth here from all the stuff in the ground that, for example, Medicare should be covering dental.
Yeah, and there is no financial reason why it couldn't or shouldn't.
Yeah, however, as well, almost 50 or more % of government income is coming from income taxes. Like, the whole thing's cooked here.
The Australian system is, whilst we are a relatively modest taxing nation overall, the percentage of GDP that's spent in taxes is actually middle to lower range. But more of it comes from income tax.
Yeah.
Which is...
Like, I'm sorry, and this is not anything to do with the burning gas is good, for example, but the fact that we've got enough gas on this island to power Australia for 1,000 years, the governments, so many years have dropped the ball. There should be free gas. Like, this is how cooked it is.
It could be.
Like, we are paying international spot prices for Australia. I know in New South Wales they want to change it, but I think in Western Australia there's a reserve. But this is so wild. I mean, I don't know.
Sort of getting a bit off the topic of
there's no topic.
Theory.
I've eaten about 15 marshmallows while...
So the constraint is what the money gets spent on. The limitation is the resources that are demanded by the spending. And you still don't want to go crazy wild, but Australia's never run material deficits. I mean, our deficits have been like 1%.
Oh, it's nothing. In the scheme of the world, you look at Australia does not have a deficit or debt problem.
No, we don't.
But you are Susan Ley. Or is it Lee?
Susan with 3 S's.
Like, going out on a limb, don't think Sue will be seeing a leadership position coming up to the next election, if not the one after. I think she's a placeholder.
So, I mean, the US is probably...
I don't know why I said that.
I suspect it's true.
Yeah, but I think it was just more like an opposition would say something. I'm turning the aircon on. I'm hot.
I mean, in my business school days, 40 years ago this year, I had to write a thesis on the what was then considered the twin deficit problem, which was a disaster for the US economy. They were running budget deficits and trade deficits, both of which were considered to be unsustainable at the time. Well, guess what? 40 years later, there's been 2 budget surpluses in the meantime, and the world has not ended.
Hey, it's Glenn here. Thank you so much for watching today's video. You made it to the end. Can I ask a favor? Can you hit that like button and maybe hit subscribe if you want to get notified when we release further videos just like this one, whether you watch the Money podcast or Retire Right. And remember, if you want to learn more about investing, I've got an investing book, The Quick Start Guide to Investing, and there's a link in the description to get your hands on a copy. Thank you so much. Bye.